note before we begin. This story is based on an actual event that happened to me during my childhood. I have changed some of the names. However, this is the best of my recollection. It was 35 years ago or more. I was around 10 years old. I do hope you enjoy the story. And, as always, like, share, and subscribe. Thank you. The Gunman, a StoryMan-Jack original story. You know, even though back 35 years ago, the world was a much different place than it is today. And horrible things happened. We just didn't know about it. We didn't have access to internet or cable or even video games. We were blissfully ignorant about how the world worked and how much evil was actually in it. It was a Saturday, I remember. We lived in a trailer home, mobile home, if you will, and my parents' trailer sat perpendicular to my grandmother's trailer on a large acre lot. I remember looking across the White Rock Road to the acre lot that day. I don't know why it sticks in my mind, but my mom and dad had just bought that land and were about to move their own mobile home there. And I wasn't excited about it. I didn't really want to live across the street from my grandmother or my cousins, who she had to raise. Their mom had been killed when we were all very young, and so they had gone to live with my grandmother. I didn't get along with my cousins. They were bullies. 1 and 2 years older than me, they were always bigger than I was. That changed later in life, but I had to wait a long time to get my revenge. And as I said before, we didn't have video games or more than 4 channels on broadcast television. Cable wasn't something normal people even knew about, much less had. I think that was the time of the big satellite dishes in the backyards of the rich guys who lived down in the better neighborhoods. What we had were bicycles. Now, our community was a strange thing. I look back on it. We were located about a mile or 2 away from a lake, and the place was set up in 1 acre lots. One could buy one of those lots and either have a mobile home moved in or a home built. Since the cost of mobile homes were a fraction of even a decent little bitty house, most of the community had gone that direction and purchased mobile homes. And in the 80s, kids from 7 to 15 had free reign and free run as far as they could go. People didn't keep up with them. We didn't have cell phones or GPS or anything like that. We were just on the honor system. Be home by dark, eat dinner. But like many of these pop-up communities, we had to go about a mile down our road to find our mailbox, which was strapped together on a post with about 10 or 15 other mailboxes. It was my job to check the mail every day for my parents and my grandmother. I don't believe my parents know to this day how far we were able to roam on those bikes. Heck, I was 10 and I'd ridden mine all the way down to the highway where the bridge went over the lake to fish. In retrospect, it'd probably been a good thing I hadn't caught any fish on that trip, since I would have had to explain my father during interrogation just where I'd caught them and how I'd gotten to the place where I'd caught them. And me, being too stupid and with low self-esteem, would be more than happy to tell him proudly how I traveled by myself to a place I shouldn't have been to catch fish. Oh, I wouldn't get into too much trouble. You know, it was a different time. People weren't paranoid about their kids getting taken. But then we didn't know what was all out there. I remember riding my bike, the vibrations of the seat, the smell of the White Rock Road, which was what most of our side roads were always made out of out in the country in North Texas. And you could see the rocks blur beneath you as you look down between your legs to see how fast your legs were pumping to move the bike as fast as you could. BMX bikes. We were enamored with jumping ramps and literally trying to kill ourselves on those things. Doing things that they were not ever designed to do. Jumping off roofs of houses. We were crazy. But aren't all boys at some point in their life? Nowadays kids are tweaking their computers or getting a better video game controller or making rapid fire or changing out keyboard parts. We did that with our bicycles. Better tires, better wheels with better bearings, sports seats that made you feel like you were going faster, or banana seats for the poor fellow who had to carry some friends along whose parents couldn't afford to buy them a bike. We did it all. And yes, I know that none of that did absolutely anything to make us ride our bikes better or faster, but we thought it did. And belief has a magic of its very own. On this particular Saturday, my cousins Kyle and Ernest came with me. I was 10 and they, as I said, they were always bigger than I. So I didn't usually argue with them coming along, though as a child I had a habit of wanting to keep to myself. There were various ponds about the place, and I would go as a daily ritual and spend a few hours after school, or most of the day if it were a weekend, fishing for the fat mud catfish that sat at the bottom of each of these ponds. Mud cats aren't good to eat, but they sure are fun to catch. They fight like the devil. Some days, if I was just wanting some action, I would get little balls of bread and put on the end of a hook and just fight with the sunfish all day. It was fun. And it was just me and the world, nature. But I didn't care if they came along. As it turned out, I was glad they did. Though, they were doing the bully thing, telling me they would take mom's mail, and I didn't care, but I knew they would try to steal my mail too. They got my mother into trouble just the month before because they stole the mail from me and burned it right in front of me. My grandmother didn't believe that they would do such a thing, but the powers turned off the next week because Mom didn't catch the late notice in the mail. As I turned the corner trying for all I was worth to get to the mailboxes before my cousins could, I noticed a guy hammering away at the line of mailboxes with a metal baseball bat. Now, we were in that small community, but, there's quite a few people in it. It meant that you probably knew somebody personally, but most likely you didn't have any interactions with them, though everyone knew of everyone else. All I knew about this guy, and I was 10, remember? He could have been 20 or 15 for all I knew, was that he had problems. I knew his sister Jenna, but I didn't know his name, and I had a crush on Jenna. But she was a few years older than me, and wouldn't have even talked to her if she didn't ride the bus to school with me at the god-awful early hours of the morning we had to catch it. Jenna had told me her brother was dangerous. He'd been to that mythical state hospital down in the next city, and was crazy as a loon, she said. You stay away from him, okay, Jackie? She had told me one day. Now that I recall, his name was Junior. Just throw rocks at Junior until he goes away. He'll forget about you later. I don't know why, but that was all I could think about when I saw Junior hammering all those mailboxes, was to throw rocks at him until he went away. Me standing there with my bike between my legs, a little fat kid with low self-esteem. I picked up a rock from the road. There's something you should know about kids who grow up in the country with little things, little to do to alleviate their boredom. We throw rocks sometimes for hours at a time. See if we could hit the can, see if we could knock the can off a wall, see if we could get the rock in the can without knocking the can off the wall. Over and over again, day after day, with rocks, with dirt clods from the garden, day after day. You get really good at throwing rocks. You have nothing better to do. And you do this all the time. And just as my cousin stopped next to me, I threw the first rock, and it hit Junior right between the eyes. He staggered back, his eyes going wide, and I saw a trickle of blood run down his forehead. "What are you doing?" Ernest yelled, throwing a rock of his own, but it was way wide. "Stop hitting our mailboxes, you retard," my cousin Kyle said. It wasn't really a slur back then, but people like Kyle are why it's considered a slur now. But then Kyle's a retard too, so... I don't remember when Junior ran off, but he did. I just remember throwing rock after rock, reaching down to the road and pulling up another and throwing until he ran away. I know I hit him more than once, and I'd heard him howl, so it hurt. And for a time, it seemed like I'd saved the day, though I was sure my cousins would tell my grandmother that they had driven the villain off. Yes, now, as an adult, I know. We should have just told my parents about what Junior had done to the mailboxes. That would have taken it up the proper chain of command to the proper authorities, and everything would have ended well. Someone would have been in trouble for bashing mailboxes, and they would have been replaced, and no one would have thought about it 35 years later. As a child, after Junior ran off, I thought of myself as a hero. And that's all I had to go on. Comic books, movies, TV shows. That was my jam, man. Superheroes. And for a time, I felt like I'd driven a villain away. Like I was the hero that day. And it didn't matter if my cousins took credit, because I knew what I'd done. Now, as was our custom on Saturday afternoons, my parents and my grandparents would have a cookout. I wouldn't call it a barbecue, though usually it was barbecue, brisket, or ribs or something with beans and potatoes, all done on a smoker and a grill. Everyone drinking enough beer to float an aircraft carrier. We kids had to stand around and grab the empties and throw them away, otherwise we'd spend the next week outside picking up cigarette butts and beer cans. I stood next to my two cousins leaning against the end of our trailer. Directly in front of us was the patio where my grandparents and parents sat, lazily tending their cook fire and drinking beer. Just beyond them was my grandmother's trailer, and just to the right of her end of that trailer was the entrance to the alley behind the whole community. And that alley wasn't even really a real alley. It was just a padded lane of sand where you could drive a truck if it were dry. My cousin Kyle grabbed my shoulder. As I wasn't paying attention to much, I spent a lot of my time off in my own little world. Ryder. "Jack, there's a guy with a gun pointed at you," he said. I looked at him. He was a bully and an ass. My natural inclination, just from past experience, was to think that he was making fun of me. But when I saw his eyes, he was scared. And I've never seen him scared like that before. In fact, I'd never seen anyone scared like that before. I looked over, and there was Junior. He stood in the alley with a bolt-action rifle pointed at me. Now, I was a snot-nosed 10-year-old kid, and I don't know what other snot-nosed 10-year-old kids would have done in my situation. I only know what I did. I moved 3 steps to the right. The gun followed me. I whispered, "Hey, Kyle, move over 3 steps, okay? The other way." He moved, and nothing. Junior just kept pointing the gun at me, over my grandparents' and parents' heads. It was then that I knew. Junior wasn't mad that we'd called him names and ran him away from the mailboxes. Hell, maybe he'd forgotten why he was even angry at the mailboxes in the first place. For all I know, he could have gotten bad news in the mail. I didn't know. Junior was pissed that I'd hit him in the head with a rock. Several rocks. What to do? I distinctly remember thinking that my dad would have shot me by now. When you grow up in rural America, especially in Texas, you're trained from a very young age to know about guns, how to use them, what they did, and I'd only ever shot a few. But I remember my dad taking me out and hanging a dead cow from a tree. The cow had broken her neck down in the creek bed. And Dad wanted to show us what a gun did to meat, what it would do to us, why they were never toys. And he handed me a revolver. And I hit that carcass dead center, though I nearly knocked myself out because I didn't know how to handle recoil and hit myself in the forehead with the gun. I have a knot on my forehead to this day. But it blew a hole so wide I could put my arm through it. So I knew what a gun would do to people. And I knew that you never hesitate. Never waver on your shot, Jack, my dad had said. You decide to take an animal, you don't hesitate, or you'll lose your chance and you won't eat that night. I didn't think Junior was going to shoot me. I had no doubt. He was just trying to scare me. Probably didn't even have any ammunition in the gun. Calmly. Had no idea why I was calm. Everyone always talks about that to this day. He just walked up like it was no big deal, Mom would say. I guess I thought that if I acted normal, he wouldn't shoot. If I jumped, or if I ran or screamed, I would scare him into pulling the trigger. But hell, I was 10 years old. I didn't reason that way. But, for whatever reason, I walked up very calmly to my father, who sat, no shirt, cut off blue jeans, and flip-flops, a lit cigarette in his mouth, and a Budweiser in his hand. "Dad?" I said, shaking his shoulder. He said there was a shake in my voice, but I was calm, and it made him turn and look at me, concerned. He heard something in my voice. I don't remember what I was thinking. "What's wrong?" he asked. "There's a guy with a gun pointed at me." And just as I said it, there was a ping at the side of the house and followed immediately by a loud boom. That's what everyone else heard. But what they didn't hear was a whistle that flew past my ear just before the ping off the metal of the house. I guess I was wrong. Junior did want to shoot me. That rock must have hurt his forehead much more than I thought it did. My father jumped up out of his seat and just started running. That's when Junior tried to load another bullet and jammed his gun. He turned and ran. My grandparents, more spry than I'd ever seen them, grabbed us kids and all ran into the house. That was when all hell broke loose. Now I know you've all seen it. the trope, the stereotype, the ultimate thing. A bunch of rednecks and a posse in the back of a pickup truck waving guns to go after somebody who had insulted their clan. Well, to be honest, it's not much far off the mark. Though they weren't waving their guns, they had them all either strapped or holstered. But the whole neighborhood did show up. Most of them drunk on a Saturday afternoon. Everyone from the pastor to the local church to the quiet, very poor couple down the road who would beg sometimes for a glass of wild turkey from my dad so the husband could sleep. All in trucks and all, well, to my 10-year-old eyes, out for blood. My mother made all us kids stay in the house, and I was glad for me that the adventure was over. The adults would handle it now. Nobody was pointing a gun at me anymore, and I was safe. Everybody was on alert. I didn't have to do anything but find something to do inside the house. And since Kyle and Ernest had broken my Atari, I didn't have that much to do. Alas, the least is often needed the most. And the police came. I have to blame my grandmother for that. She was always a busybody. She probably called them. Although, looking back, it was the right thing to do. 2 men in blue uniforms came into the house. Sheriff's deputies, though I didn't know it at the time. All I knew at 10 years old was what I saw in T.J. Hooker or Starsky and Hutch. I knew they meant business, and they weren't going to be nice to me. I was terrified. That's the thing. I think most of us grow up for a natural aversion to those who we call to be our enforcers. It's built into our education, reading material, and fiction. But as a kid, you knew was that you didn't mess around with the police. Even the nice man who came on career day would be stern about not doing drugs or staying out of trouble because he had those handcuffs in his hand and a gun strapped to his waist. They had those mystical powers called jail, where they could send anyone for any reason, no matter who they were. Mr. Sisk, one of them asked. I sat on the couch and looked around to see where my dad was. Maybe he'd gotten back and I hadn't seen him. And he had. He was standing outside the door. But apparently the officer was talking to me. Jackie, my mom prompted. Can you tell us what happened, son? The officer tried again. I don't know why the man was calling me son. Heck, he didn't even look like me. I just went to check the mail. Junior, that's the guy, was beating up the mailboxes with a bat. So I threw a rock at him and hollered at him to go away. And Kyle and Ernest started throwing rocks too, just to get him to leave our stuff alone so we could get our mail. Okay. And what just happened a while ago? We were standing outside, Kyle and Ernest and me. And Kyle saw Junior pointing a gun. I told him. His face pitching confusion. How do you know he was pointing at you and not one of your cousins or anybody else outside? He asked.
Power off.
I was starting to think that it was stupid to be a police officer if you thought someone couldn't tell where a gun was pointed. But I answered him anyway. When I moved, the gun followed me. It didn't follow anyone else when they moved. I told him the rest. The bullet going past my ear, the hole in the trailer, which they did check out. Everything. Then the police officer grew very angry, his face red. And then he nodded, like he was expecting to hear that. I just figured it was some sort of child psychology thing they talked about on what Mom watched on the Ricky Lake show. Do you know where Junior lives? The officer asked me. Yeah. Bus picks him up after they picked me up in the morning. We had to walk down to the end of our street, And I kind of envy kids who didn't have to walk a quarter of a mile to catch the bus at 5:30 in the morning. Can you show us? He asked. Well, it's just go to the end of the street, turn left and go to that road ends at the mailboxes and then turn another left. It's the trailer number 5 on the right, I told him. He just looked at my mom. Jackie, he needs you to show him, Mom said. Why? I mean, that's where he lives. Because we need you to identify him from the car. I don't have a warrant, and I need somebody to point him out to us. I must have looked horrified because the officer assured me, you'll be in the back of the car and he won't even see you through the film on the window. He won't know it's you pointing him out. I didn't know what the officer saw on my face, but all I could think inside was how exciting it was. I would get to ride in a cop car. I would be an investigator, a hero, someone pointing out the bad guys to the muscle. I've had to ride in a few of those cars later on in my life, and let me tell you, that first time, it was by far the best time I'd ever ridden in the back of a police officer's car. We rode over, and I sat in the back seat, hunched down as if I was on a clandestine mission, thinking myself as a part of a crime-fighting team. Though the crime was perpetrated on me, my smarts and quick thinking led to the capture of a brazen criminal. I watched way too much TV, and I read way too many books. One officer left the car and went up to Junior's door and knocked while the driver stayed with me. He looked back at us and then knocked again. An older man, older I say, he could have been anything from 40 to 70 for all I knew, but he looked old to me. I assumed it was Junior's dad came to the door. I could hear them talking, and Junior's dad was agitated but didn't seem to be angry. And even though all the doors and windows were closed, I heard them talking, but it was like it came from the speaker at the drive-in all crackly. We're looking for your son, the officer was informing Mr. Trotter. I haven't seen him in a week, the man was saying. Is this Junior's dad? The officer in the car asked me. I guess, I told him. We aren't friends or anything. He doesn't get on the bus, just his sister. All the while, I was watching out the dark window. Here's the thing about older mobile homes, and the reason people think they're eyesores. In order to hide the wheels that are on every base of a mobile home, there is what is called underpinning. Metal or wood that runs around the underside of a trailer house. Invariably, mobile homes have to have a lot of work done to plumbing and electrical, etc. And all of that is under the house. When you remove some of the underpinning, people are lazy and don't put it back. Eventually, older trailer houses just look like a box on top of a bunch of blocks. And you can see all the way underneath to the other side. The only thing hampering your vision will be the occasional wheels and structure that are setting upon the blocks. And I was looking under there, getting bored, waiting for someone to draw a gun and chase down the criminal. And that was when I saw him. He jumped out of his window or something in the back of the house. Maybe he'd just come out the back door, I don't know. But I was looking for the most exciting thing I could. And the idiot still had the gun in his hands. I saw underneath and he picked himself up. Sir? The guy, he just jumped out the window in the back, I told the officer and tried to open my door. Kid, stay here, he said, and he jumped out of the car. I couldn't open my door. They'd locked me in. I couldn't find the stupid pull that would unlock it. What was that? I mean, I was a kid. TV didn't go into much detail, at least not on Starsky and Hutch, about how the back door didn't open. Hell, their trademark car didn't even have a back door. The officer that was at the door blocked Junior's father from seeing around and what was going on, while the other officer I'd told ran Junior down and tackled him into the dirt. And that was that. They waited for about what seemed to me an hour, but couldn't have been more than half that time, sitting in the back of a car, wondering when dinner was. They took Junior away in the other car and then drove me home. Apparently, I'd overheard my dad talking about it because I was able to go to the house and identify, and Junior was stupid enough to have the gun in question in his hands, and it matched the bullet they dug out of the side of our house. I wouldn't have to go to court and testify. I was kind of angry about that. It was rotten luck. I wanted to hear someone scream, "I object," once in real life, and not on LA Law that my parents forced us to watch every night at 9 o'clock. It seemed like every night. It was probably once a week. Rumors spread far and wide. I'd heard the next Monday that Junior had escaped from the mental institution and was planning on a murder spree that was supposed to start with me. You must remember that anyone having to do with a state mental institution had to be another Michael Myers in training. That's, we didn't get that many movies. It was all bunk, of course, but that's what legends are made of, right? Hell, there was even one that the guy who played Alfalfa in the original Our Gang TV show had bought the patch of land down the street and half finished a house before he died, which was true and not true at the same time. But that's another story. Junior was trying to get his GED. He'd just gotten out of the mental institution with good marks, saying that he was fit back to go to society, and he'd mailed into his final test, which had come back as a failure. He hadn't been able to deal with his frustration and took it out on, I guess, the messenger, the mailbox. Junior was disturbed, but he'd been in and out of mental institutions since his mom had committed suicide in front of him when he was 6. Not everyone had the happy redneck existence I had, and I thought mine was hard. I heard they put him back in the hospital after our little incident, and not jail, which I'm glad of now. It makes me feel better that I didn't take part in sending somebody who obviously needed help to a place that wasn't designed to help him. I didn't have to throw that rock, Junior didn't have to hit the mailbox either. But I learned something about myself. That I have a choice, just like everybody else does. I can control the outcome of my actions by thinking. And that day, I got a second chance. Not many people get that. But had that bullet been just a few inches one way, it would hit me square dead in the forehead. In fact, Junior had been close enough that I can't believe he'd missed, unless he'd missed on purpose. I don't know what happened to Junior, or his dad, or his sister after that. Sometimes I'll think about them and say that, call their names in my prayers. Sometimes we don't know why people do the things they do. People are just people, and they have pains and scars and problems we can't fathom, much less understand. That's the end of this story, and I hope you enjoyed it. I thank you for listening, and as always, share this with your friends and family, and subscribe. Have a nice day.